Ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls of all shapes and sizes, today I'm going to show you how to build a master chain from scratch. Well, at least how I build my mastering chain from scratch. There are so many ways to master a song, and this is the way that I've used for the past couple of years that has worked for me. And today I'm going to walk you through my process step by step, talk through the plugins that I use and the reasons I use the plugins and what I am doing with those said plugins. My process is the same whether I'm working in Logic Pro or Pro Tools or FL Studio or Ableton or anything. The process will work with any DAW, and that's why I'm doing this video with FL Studio, so that you can see that you can build a chain like this with any DAW of your choice. So let's start from the very top of the chain. The very first plugin I like to put on my mastering chain is the VU meter. This just gives me a visual representation of where the levels of the entire track is. My goal with this is to make sure I am not hitting red or staying at red at any point in time during the entire record. Let's play the song and see what that looks like.
What tell you want tonight, shit, you go like trash, I'm a fiendish man, even my friends don't know.
So as you can see, I'm currently diving into the red just a little bit there. Typically what I would do most times if I'm working on somebody else's song is maybe just turn down the level a bit to where I'm sitting at mainly 0 dB on the VU meter. If you're working in FL Studio, your volume knob on the channel rack is your trim knob. So this is your pre-fader level, and this is what I would use to turn down the level of this particular song. So I'm just going to take this down by say 2 dB.
What tell you want tonight, shit, you go like trash,
Okay.
I'm a fiendish man, even my friends don't know.
Good. Right, so that's perfect. At 0, we have at least about -6 dB of headroom to work with, which is perfect for the rest of our mastering process. So we move along. The next plugin I like to use on my mastering chain is Ozone. We're using Ozone 11 for this demonstration, and this is how I like to use Ozone. With Ozone, I typically do some EQing and then my stereo imaging before I proceed down the rest of the chain. So I'm going to bypass this for now so we can see how all of this works. So first of all, we have the first EQ here, which is a dynamic EQ. At this stage, what I'm trying to do essentially is fix any problems that would be in the entire record. What I mean by that is tame resonant frequencies. These different frequency range that I have targeted for some attenuation are all points in the song that I've listened to, and I've decided, you know what, there are some resonant frequencies here that I don't like. For example, for solo 3K, just a little bit of a sharp frequency there. Again, some very sharp frequencies. It's also very important to know that in your mastering stages, what you're trying to do is make very tiny adjustments that will lead to very big results at the end of the day. That's why you see that I am not doing more than 1 dB of gain reduction, because I would usually master songs that I work on. If I need to do any serious gain reduction to try to fix any problem in the song, then I would rather go into the mix itself to fix that problem. It means that's a serious problem. Essentially, that's what I'm trying to say. With mastering, we are going to eventually make the song louder and bigger. Any problem that goes through the processes that we do to make the song big and louder will also become big and louder. You know what I mean? I typically like to do this -1 dB attenuation around 200 Hz. It helps the low end sound a bit more defined. And then I move on to the next EQ. Basically, my first stage of trying to shape the tone of the song. I could do it with a dynamic EQ, but I like to split my processing across different plugins. I think that helps with achieving a sound that does not sound over-processed. You know what I mean? Maybe it's just me, but that's what I've experienced, and that's why I do these things. I'm doing about a 1 dB boost around 62 Hz. The purpose of that is just to add a little bit more punch to the low end. Then after that, I move on to the stereo imaging. I like to use this stereo imager because you have the option of setting crossover points, and that allows me to increase the width of the different frequency range in the song differently. I typically like to do more stereo widening on the higher frequencies. That's from 10K and up. Then just a little bit of stereo widening from 1.5K to 10K. I don't do anything around 120 Hz to 1.5K. And I always like to narrow everything below 120 Hz to just make the low end sound tighter. So this is without Ozone. Beautiful. And then with Ozone. I'm a fiendish man, even my friends don't know. Yeah. And you can hear that we already have a bit of a fatter sound and wider sound because of our stereo imaging. Another thing I like to do here is activate gain match because I don't want to add any gain. You can see that we are currently peaking at -5 dB LUFS, which means I could actually go back and turn this down by -1 dB if I want to maintain strict -6 dB of headroom before I proceed down the rest of the chain. But -5 works just fine, so I'm not going to bother myself with this. Now, the next plugin I like to add to the chain is another EQ. I'm using the Potec EQ for this demonstration, but again, you can use any EQ that you like. You can even use a mastering EQ if you feel like you have any of those mastering EQs, but any good EQ will work. Now, one thing I also want you to pay attention to is the type of plugins that I'm using, not necessarily the brand of the plugins that I'm using. So which means if you have a normal FL EQ, you could actually just use that here. You know what I mean? And for where I'm using the compressor, you can use the normal compressor, any compressor that you have. And where I use the saturation plugin, you can replace that with any saturation plugin that you like. You can also replace the clipper with any clipper that you like. So the brand of the plugin is not the main takeaway, it's the type of plugin. Because you can also achieve a great sounding master with whatever plugins that you have. Another reason why I like the Potec for mastering is because it's a very easy and simple and straightforward plugin. And the purpose of this EQ is to shape the tone of the entire record to how I want it to sound. As you can see, we're doing a boost up to 4 dB around 100 Hz to make the low end sound fatter and also to make the entire record sound warmer. You'll hear in a minute. And I'm also doing a 2 dB attenuation on the low frequency as well. Potec allows you to do this thing where you can boost and attenuate at the same time. It creates this very amazing curve that gives you a tight low end sound. It's actually quite nice. And for the high frequencies, I'm doing a 4 dB boost around 16 kilohertz to just add air to the entire song. And I've also set the output gain to -2.5 dB. That's because I am also not trying to add gain at this stage of the mastering chain. I'm properly gain matching to ensure that I'm hearing the changes and not the volume, because definitely when you boost, you're going to add gain to your signal. So I'm compensating for that gain by bringing down the output by -2.5 dB to try to make sure I am still maintaining the original -6 dB headroom that I started with. So without the Potec EQ, and then with the Potec EQ, man, even my friends don't know. She know until I beg, until I don't they cry. Oh. You can hear that the music is fatter, it's warmer, and we have a bit of brightness on the high frequencies, which is also very smooth. The highs from the Potec is actually very smooth. Again, before. After. You know what I mean? Pay attention to the low end, you can hear the thickness, you know what I mean? Amazing plugin for mastering. And then the next plugin on the chain is our compressor. I like to EQ before I compress because the EQing process will fix the problems in the song and shape the tone, and then we'll use the compressor to make all of that goodness, all of that good sound that we've created to become fatter. The purpose of a compressor when you're mastering is mainly to glue the entire sound together to make everything sound cohesive. So we're not going to be doing too much compression because we want to make sure the music is breathing. We want to retain some dynamics in the song. We want to make sure the music sounds open, essentially. So to achieve that, it's quite simple. We need a very slow attack so that we can have the transient cut through. Somewhere around 10 milliseconds always work, and a very, very, very fast release. And also a very small ratio works. I like to use 2:1, but you can experiment with 4 and hear how it affects your record. I also like to set the sidechain filter to 90 Hz, which means the compressor is going to basically ignore everything below 90 Hz. That way we are getting much more even compression across the entire record, because typically the low end tend to be what triggers compression when you are mastering. And then once you've done all of that, you just set your threshold till you get maximum of -2 dB of gain reduction. At least that's how I like to do it. Yeah, you can see that there, right? And then I would usually obviously set my makeup gain to make up for the gain reduction, 2 dB in this scenario, but you can use your ears and just dial in your settings based on what works for your song. So without the compressor, I'm a Finnish man, even my friends don't know. Yeah. She know until I beg, until with the compressor. But tell you one tonight, you go like trash,
a fiendish man, even my friends don't know.
You can hear that the music is fatter. We can hear the pads more. You know, the bass is thick. We're getting a bit more clarity on the overall record. You know what I mean? That's what this does for the entire song. It's actually quite sick. And then the next plugin on the mastering chain is the saturation plugin. For this demonstration, I'm using the AFROBEAT saturator, and I am focusing the saturation on the mids. You also have the option of setting this to sides or stereo, basically, but I like to focus the saturation on just the mids whenever I'm using this plugin. And I've set the saturator to TG. TG sounds warmer, and I'm also doing some expansion here, and I'm just blending a little bit of that expanded signal into the rest of the mix. And I'm blending about 50% of the saturated signal with the rest of the signal. Again, the purpose of saturation is to add harmonics to your sound, make it sound bigger and fuller, and just gives it a much more finished sound, if you will. So let's do a quick A/B and see how the saturation is affecting the song. So without the saturation,
What tell you want tonight, shit, you go like trash, yo. I'm a fiendish man, even my friends don't know.
then with the saturation,
What tell you want tonight, shit, you go like trash, yo. I'm a fiendish man, even my friends don't know.
you can hear how thick the music sounds. Everything feels like it's, you know, it's solid, it's tighter. I don't know how best to describe it, but it's tighter. It feels like we've filled up all of those pockets in the song with all of the harmonics that we've added with the saturation. Again, without the saturation,
What tell you want tonight, shit, you go like trash, yo.
and then with saturation,
What tell you want tonight, shit, you go like trash, yo.
very, very, very dope. Another thing I like to do with this particular plugin is make sure I set my input and output correctly. So which means I try to level match. And so in this case, I've turned down the input just a little bit so that when I play the song, I am barely also hitting the red. And then to level match the signal. That's why when I bypass the plugin and put it back on, you can hear that we are still on the same level. There's not a huge level jump, but we are getting the effects of the plugin. Without it,
What tell you want tonight, shit, you go like trash, yo. I'm a fiendish man.
then with the plugin,
What tell you want tonight, shit, you go like trash, yo. I'm a fiendish.
we also have this meter selector knob here so we can flip between the in and out so we can see where we are. And I'm usually okay with the level hitting the red going out of the AFROBEAT saturator. So let's look at that.
What tell you want tonight, shit, you go like trash, yo. I'm a fiendish man, even my friends don't know.
All right, but you can see that it's just only at the very, very top where the kick hits twice. I'm not staying there at all. So that way we can ensure that we are still maintaining the initial headroom that we started with, but we are obviously making all of these changes that are affecting the quality of the sound, not the level of the sound just yet. Okay, so the next plugin on the chain is the clipper. I have two clippers here. Sometimes I like to use the iron pusher, sometimes I like to use the BX Brainworks clipper, sometimes I like to use the gold clip, but I've been using the gold clip a lot in recent times. I really like the sound of the gold clip. It sounds warmer. So we're just going to look at the gold clip for now. At the clipping stage is where I start to add gain to the entire song to really make it loud. I made a full video about clipping and gold clip, and I'm going to leave a link here in case you want to check that out. But at this stage, what we're doing basically is clipping our picks and making the song louder before we even hit the limiter, so that when we get to the limiting stage, we are not overworking the limiter and we're not getting that pumping sound, which will eventually mean that we have a very open and loud master that can breathe. You know what I mean? So let's look at that real quick.
Be the best of me, you know why you the best for me.
There's a few things I like to do during the clipping process. One is to make sure I'm doing maybe 2 dB or maximum 3 dB of clipping. I'm making sure that I'm picking at most minus 4 dB coming out of the clipper. That's my own way of sort of making sure that I am getting some loudness from the clipper before I hit the limiter. So let's listen to this and see how it's affecting the record essentially. So without the clipper,
I gave you the best of me.
and then with the clipper,
I gave you the best of me, you know why you the best for me.
so as you can see, we're doing about 2.2 dB of clipping here, and we are picking at minus 4.5 dB, which is great. You know, we have enough headroom to hit the limiter and get a very loud sounding master without any of the pumping effects essentially. Again, you can check my video on clipping to fully understand how clipping works and how to use this plugin to its full potential. Now, the last plugin on the chain is a limiter. Again, this can be any limiter that you choose to work with. For this video though, we're using the L4 limiter, and this is our final stage in the mastering process to get a very loud master that can can compete commercially with all the songs that are out there in the world. So without the limiter,
I gave you the best of me, you know why you the best for me.
And then with the limiter,
I gave you the best of me, you know why you the best for me. I didn't focus on his sign, so cause she be like ecstasy, you know why I give you extra things. And I carry you for my I gave you the best of me, you know why you the best for me.
That's a very loud song. And that was giving us around -10 dB LUFS and a true peak of 1.2 dB. Again, I made a video on the L4 Ultra Maximizer in case you want to check that out and see how this works. And at this stage, you can also make some adjustments that will benefit your record. For example, you could decide to set your threshold at the point where you don't exceed -1 dB true peak, or set your ceiling to where you can always achieve that. I'm currently getting about -5 dB of attenuation on this particular master. You could choose you want less than that. You can choose that you want more than that. You know, I'm currently doing some all-port compression with this limiter. You can choose to do that or not do that. But at the end of the day, whatever you do at this limiting stage, after you followed all of this process, will definitely get you a loud master that can compete with songs that are out there. There's one bonus thing I want to talk about before I end this video, and that's hi-fi, to sort of control the harshness in your song. Sometimes you might have songs that you did not mix but you're mastering, and the high frequencies are too harsh beyond what the artist likes, you know, or beyond what you actually think will work for the song. You can use hi-fi to sort of correct that. Again, I made a video on hi-fi and how you can use that. I'm going to leave a link here in case you want to check that out. But if I was to use that for this chain, I would definitely place the hi-fi just before my ozone 11. Select the frequency range that I want to control the harshness of, and then just dial in my settings essentially. Let's unlink that.
I gave you the best of me, you know why you the best for me. I gave you the best of me, you know why you the best for me.
So without hi-fi,
With the best of me, you know why you the best for me.
and then with hi-fi,
I gave you the best of me, you know why you the best for me.
so you can hear how we've managed to pull some of the harshness from the high frequencies. Again, this is something that is strictly based on taste. You might actually prefer the song the way it was before I used the hi-fi to tame some of those high frequencies. But this is also something that you can do if you're working on a song that you did not mix and the high frequencies are not very delicious to your ears. And you can also do the same thing with any dynamic EQ. You know, you can do the same thing with a multiband compressor. You can do the same thing with Suit 2. You can do the same thing with Waves, Curves, Equator. You know what I mean? So there's a lot of plugins that you can use to tame harshness in a mix that you did not work on, that you were mastering. Again, I will place this before any of the processing that I will do, because the ideology is to fix problems first, you know, before we do any sort of coloring and tone shaping and then eventually clipping and then making things bigger. So that's it for this one. I hope you got something from this. And if you did, make sure you leave me a like and subscribe to the channel. I've not made a video to announce this yet, but I have currently uploaded some new mastering presets to the store. The gold has a gold clipper and the pusher Afrobeat mastering preset has the IM pusher. The difference is the gold clip sounds a bit warmer than the IM pusher, but that's also dependent on taste and also dependent on the plugin that you have. So if you have the IM pusher, you can get the pusher Afrobeat mastering preset, and if you have the gold clip, you can get the gold Afrobeat mastering preset, or you can get either one of them and just replace the clipper with a new clipper that you like. If you're getting the mastering presets today, you're getting for half the price, and then it's going to go back to full price after a week. But all channel members will get my mastering presets for free. So if you're a channel member and you're watching this video, just comment your email down below and I'll send you a link to download my mastering preset for free. Again, all channel members will get my mastering presets for free. All right, if you want to book my service for mixing and mastering, make sure you hit the link below to check out my engineers page, or you can hit me up on Instagram at BellyMacaulayDB. And if you want to buy any of my vocal presets as well as my mixing and mastering templates, I'm going to leave the link below as well. So yeah, man, that's it for now. I shall see you on the next one. Belly Macaulay out.
She do me wash and wear. She serve me breakfast, lunch and dinner. Just because her back a bigger. Now why they do like a go digger? Ego digger. She tell me say make a shut up sit down. Just because her back a